I separated, and I'm now with Linda Koslowski, and that's the sort of full story. How, when, where, why, and all these sort of intimate details. No one needs to know any of that.
Paul Hogan, the legendary star of Crocodile Dundee, has finally opened up about the most powerful truth of his life. A confession about the woman who defined his heart. Beyond the fame, the blockbuster success, and the headlines that followed him for decades, Hogan's greatest story was never about Hollywood. It was about love. A love that captured the world's imagination, ended in heartbreak, and yet never truly disappeared. After years of silence, Hogan is finally ready to reveal who it was and why that love still lingers in his heart today. Meeting Linda Koslowski. The magic of Crocodile Dundee didn't stop at its fish-out-of-water premise or its adventurous comedy. At its emotional core was the relationship between Mick Dundee and Sue Charlton, the American journalist who followed him into the outback and later into New York. That love story, central to the movie's appeal, soon mirrored real life for its stars, Paul Hogan and Linda Koslowski. Linda was a young actress from Connecticut with Broadway experience, but little recognition in film. Landing the role of Sue was meant to be her big career break, not a life-altering personal chapter. When she met Hogan on set, she saw him not as the soon-to-be global icon, but as a down-to-earth man with a sharp wit and a knack for making people feel comfortable. For Hogan, Linda was refreshing in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't dazzled by his emerging celebrity status. Instead, she connected with the man behind the public image, someone who still thought of himself as a lucky Aussie who once painted bridges. From the first days of filming, their connection was palpable. Cast and crew remembered how natural their banter seemed, as though they were slipping into roles they already knew by heart. Linda would later admit that the chemistry she shared with Hogan felt unspoken and magnetic, unlike anything she'd experienced before. That authenticity spilled over onto the screen, making their on-camera romance feel irresistibly real to audiences around the globe. Then came the one complication that could not be avoided. Hogan was not a free man. He was still married to his first wife, Noeline Edwards, the mother of his 5 children. Their relationship had weathered turbulent times before: a divorce in 1981 and reconciliation, remarriage. But by the time Crocodile Dundee was in production, things were not good between them. With Linda, those cracks became festering questions void of answers for Hogan. Immediately came the media frenzy, on a relentless hunt. Tabloid speculation into Hogan's life reached new heights as his career took off, and his second marriage to Noeline fell apart during filming. To the general public, this was part gossip and part fairy tale. A national hero breaking the ties of a decades-long marriage for the glamorous co-star whose love story with him had set the big screen ablaze. Such things were, for Hogan and Koslowski, a very present thing. They were no longer holding keys to the welfare of the media world, but rather surrendered to what was the love story they both just knew was real. Hogan himself once stated, "You don't get to choose these things," hinting that he did not schedule whatever he found with Linda. Rather, this meeting was fated to occur outside of their control. To the fans, it was life imitating art. Mick and Sue's romance continued beyond the screen. For Hogan, it went beyond that. It was a turning point in his life that would put him on a different path right at the peak of his career. But love that begins in the glare of the spotlight rarely comes without consequences, and soon their romance would spark one of the most bitter divorces in Australian history: the humble rise of Paul Hogan. Before he became a Hollywood star, Paul Hogan was just an ordinary bloke with an extraordinary spark. Born in Sydney, Hogan grew up in a modest, working-class family. His early years weren't filled with red carpets or scripts. Instead, He learned the value of hard work, painting the Sydney Harbour Bridge, scaling dizzying heights with nothing but a brush and grit. To those around him, Hogan was simply a tradesman. But beneath the surface, he carried a sharp wit and a knack for making people laugh. Talents that would one day rewrite his life. The turning point came almost by accident. In the early 1970s, Australia had a talent show called New Faces. Unlike today's slick reality competitions, this was raw and unpredictable. Hogan wasn't a trained comedian. He didn't come with rehearsed sketches or polished stand-up. Instead, he showed up as himself, a cheeky Aussie who made fun of the judges, the format, and even the idea of talent shows. His boldness was shocking, but it worked. The audience roared with laughter, and Hogan went from bridge painter to national personality overnight. Producers took notice. Before long, Hogan was fronting his own program, The Paul Hogan Show. Week after week, he delivered sketches that blended Aussie humor with a universal appeal. He wasn't trying to be glamorous. He was relatable, the kind of bloke you'd meet at a pub. And that's exactly why people adored him. In a world where comedy often felt distant and polished, Hogan was real. He leaned into satire, poked fun at authority, and turned everyday Aussie life into material. By this time, it was the mid-1970s, and Hogan was not merely a television celebrity. He had become a national treasure. The fame went beyond the domain of comedy. He was called to promote Australia to the larger world. Hogan was then cast in a now-famous campaign for Australia's tourism with the catchphrases, "Come and say g'day," and the unforgettable promise, "Put another shrimp on the Barbie," in the 1980s. It was cheeky, it was simple, and it worked. The campaign turned Hogan into an international ambassador and painted Australia in the eyes of millions of tourists. Nonetheless, Hogan was still remarkably down-to-earth. His friends and colleagues would often say that fame did not change him much. He remained the working-class bloke from Sydney who could tell a joke at the drop of a hat, far happier in casual clothes than tuxedos. Yet Hogan's desire was building up behind the scenes. He wanted something bigger than television skits or commercials. He wanted a film that could really capture the true Australian spirit and charm audiences worldwide. That vision turned out to be Crocodile Dundee. Co-written by Hogan himself, the movie was heavily inspired by Outback legends and, of course, Hogan's flavor of humor. More than a movie, though, it was a gamble. Hollywood wasn't clamoring for a film about a bushman from the Northern Territory, but he really believed in it, and it exploded when it finally premiered in 1986. The world fell in love with Mick "Crocodile" Dundee, the rugged but kind-hearted bushman who could handle crocodiles as easily as city slickers. Paul Hogan has gone from national comedian to global superstar. Awards, interviews, and red carpets followed. But in essence, it was all quite the same as always, catching the public's attention through authenticity, humor, and a little cheek. And, as the film catapulted him into the global spotlight, it didn't just redefine his career, it began to reshape his entire personal life. The birth of a global icon. When Crocodile Dundee hit theaters in 1986, it was more than just another comedy adventure. It became an international sensation. The premise sounded simple on paper. A rugged bushman from the Australian outback finds himself navigating the urban jungle of New York City. But in Paul Hogan's hands, Mick Dundee turned into a symbol of something much larger. He wasn't just a character. He was an embodiment of Australian humor, toughness, and charm. He could wrestle a crocodile in one scene and disarm strangers with a smile in the next, presenting a kind of masculinity that was both fearless and approachable. The reaction from audiences was overwhelming. The film grossed more than $300 million worldwide. breaking records and cementing its place as the highest-grossing Australian film of all time. In the US, it trailed only Top Gun at the box office that year, an achievement no one had anticipated. Practically overnight, Paul Hogan leapt from being Australia's cheeky TV comic to a global household name. He won the Best Actor award at the Golden Globes and also earned an Academy Award nomination for co-writing the screenplay, both achievements that entirely emphasized how seismic the movie's impact was. Hollywood saw Hogan as the next big export from it. Studio executives wanted to bottle the lightning of Crocodile Dundee and turn him into a long-term star. They were quickly gathering a list of sequels and new projects. Some were commercial strikes, and others flopped. However different the outcomes were, Hogan's identity became inseparable from that of Mick Dundee. He was no longer just Paul Hogan. To millions of people worldwide, he had become Crocodile Dundee, a larger-than-life figure whose cultural footprint extended far beyond the screen. But with fame came a new layer of complexity. With the world embracing him as its rugged new hero, his private life began to change in entirely different ways. This film's success has transformed global perceptions toward Australia itself. Before then, a majority of the world's perception of Australia had been influenced by stereotypical images of kangaroos, deserts, and some distant isolation. Crocodile Dundee presented a counter-narrative of a land that is adventurous, humorous, and irresistibly attractive. What Hogan didn't know then was that this film wouldn't just change his career. On that same set, he would meet a woman whose impact on his life would be even greater than fame. Love. Amid scandal. When Paul Hogan and Linda Koslowski finally acknowledged their relationship, it wasn't just a love story, it was a scandal. For millions of Australians, Hogan wasn't just an actor, he was a national treasure. He had climbed from working-class obscurity to become the country's most beloved export, and his wholesome, cheeky charm made him seem untouchable. That image cracked the moment news broke that he had left Noeline Edwards, his high school sweetheart, his wife of more than 2 decades, and the mother of his 5 children, for a much younger American actress. The media went into overdrive. Tabloids across Australia and the US plastered headlines about betrayal, broken vows, and Hollywood temptation. Noeline herself became a figure of sympathy, dubbed Australia's most wronged woman. The couple's divorce in 1986 was ugly, drawn out, and public. The press labeled it Australia's ugliest divorce, with lawyers battling over assets and custody, while reporters documented every twist and turn. The public outrage was fierce. How could Hogan, the man who represented the quintessential Aussie spirit, walk away from his family for someone else? But behind the sensational headlines, Hogan and Koslowski were quietly building something real. They didn't flaunt their relationship in the early days, choosing instead to retreat from the media circus and focus on each other. To Hogan, Linda wasn't a glamorous Hollywood escape. She was a partner who understood the surreal world he suddenly inhabited. The overnight success of Crocodile Dundee had catapulted him into international stardom, and Linda was right there beside him, experiencing it all for the first time, too. Their connection deepened as they navigated the whirlwind together. Hogan was often criticized for abandoning his ordinary Aussie roots, but Linda gave him balance in ways the public couldn't see. She shared his love of privacy, his dry humor, and his simple pleasures away from cameras. While the world dissected their every move, the two leaned on each other, developing a bond that would last decades. While this tragedy would be hard enough for anyone to recover from, for Noeline, the hurt was ever present. Friends say that she was devastated, and that the open way in which Hogan and Linda's romance flourished only festered the wound. In Australia, small-town culture meant that gossip ran rampant. Everyone seemingly had something to say about Paul Hogan's choices. For his part, Hogan preferred never to speak about the divorce, and not to lend fuel to the fire. Still, years later, in interviews, he would admit that the fallout was one of the hardest chapters in his life. By 1990, Hogan and Koslowski were inseparable. They worked together again for Crocodile Dundee 2, and once again, the chemistry between them lit up the screen. Audiences loved them despite the tabloids portraying them as unscrupulous villains in the wake of someone else's heartbreak. While the scandal did not destroy their careers, it sure left them bruised. For Hogan, it was a difficult relationship with his homeland. Some in his home country adored him, while others never forgave him. Amidst all the noise, Hogan and Koslowski discreetly nurtured their relationship. In 1990, Hogan wrapped up his divorce settlement with Noeline, while Linda appears to have permanently moved to Australia, showing a serious commitment. By 1990, they were a couple in every way, ignoring the noise and instead enjoying life together. Far from being just media-contrived love, theirs had survived the unscrupulousness of the tabloids and the judgmental prattle surrounding Hogan's first marriage. Linda later recalled the criticism they went through. Eventually, she learned to ignore what the tabloids had to say and to trust what she and Hogan had. Thus, when they got married in 1990, it was not the usual celebrity wedding. It was a statement that, against all odds, their love is here to stay. That marriage would not only cement their bond, but also give Hogan what he called the happiest years of my life, a chapter filled with family, Hollywood success, and a love story that once seemed unstoppable. Marriage, parenthood, and Hollywood life. When Paul Hogan and Linda Koslowski tied the knot in 1990, it was more than just a wedding. To the world, it felt like the fairy tale ending to a story that had been played out on cinema screens and splashed across tabloids. For Hogan, it was a chance to start fresh. For Linda, it was a leap into a life she could never have predicted when she signed on to star in Crocodile Dundee. Their wedding was intimate compared to the scale of their fame. Surrounded by close friends and family, Hogan and Koslowski vowed to each other what they had already proven through years of scrutiny, that their love had endured the storm. It wasn't long before their union gave Hogan something even more precious: fatherhood once again. In 1998, the couple welcomed their son, Chance Hogan. For Paul, already a father to 5 children from his first marriage, Chance represented something different. With Linda, he had the opportunity to parent with the lessons, regrets, and wisdom of a man who had lived through fame, scandal, and second chances. By the late 1990s, the couple had built a life that straddled 2 worlds. They split their time between Australia and Los Angeles, but eventually settled in California, where Hogan bought a home in Venice Beach. Hollywood welcomed them with open arms. At parties, premieres, and charity galas, Paul and Linda were often photographed together, always smiling, always seemingly united. Yet those who knew them best said they preferred quiet moments over glitz, evenings with close friends, walks by the beach, or family dinners away from cameras. Professionally, Hogan's identity remained tied to the Crocodile Dundee legacy. The first film had been lightning in a bottle, and although sequels never quite captured the same magic, they kept him in the spotlight. Linda, too, reprised her role in Crocodile Dundee 2 and later Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, but her career never reached beyond the franchise. Eventually, she stepped back from acting altogether, choosing instead to focus on her family life with Hogan and raising Chance. No other time point existed in Hogan's life that was as blissful as this period. In his interviews, he often referred to Linda as his soulmate, a person who balanced him in ways he had never experienced before. Friends could remember easily having time between them, the much-needed dissolved laugh at little things, and the close intimacy brought along by really enjoying each one's company with the other. Hogan admitted that, While the outside world often read their relationship in terms of scandal, within their walls, it was simple. He was just Paul, she was just Linda, and a life of normalcy was shaped by them amid the chaos fame might have brought. Fame was never completely absent, of course. To the public, Hogan was still Mick Dundee. The family lives would never be completely private. Always, there'd be paparazzi stalking down an alley, snapping out of sneak attacks of the couple on some errand or lately dropping their other son in clutch to school. Then, financially tied peeping headlines about their past, and constant speculation as to whether or not their marriage was weathering the currently fantastic one. However, they survived the tide based on the very resilience with which they sailed through the early days of their relationship established. Only time tries even the strongest bonds. By the early 2000s, Paul and Linda were facing some of their toughest trials. Hollywood pressures, discrepancies in lifestyle, and the usual wear and tear that a relationship endures began to take their toll. Linda, who basically had given up her acting career, would sometimes wobble under the weight of the sacrifices made, while Hogan, the performer, always sought the limelight. What had started as a passionate love story in defiance began to lessen into something all the more complicated. Their problems were just another set of troubles they managed to keep away from the public eye for a while. To most people, however, they were still the quintessential couple, the real-life Dundee and Sue. They showered chance with love, traveled together, and partook in Hogan's undying fame. For Hogan, who would eventually look back on his life with Linda, those years would always be remembered as the happiest time for him. But happiness, even in its purest form, can be fragile. By 2014, the fairy tale had unraveled, and Paul Hogan once again found himself facing heartbreak, this time losing the very woman he had once called the love of his life. The split and heartache. By the time Paul Hogan and Linda Koslowski announced their separation in 2013, the news felt both shocking and strangely inevitable. For decades, they had stood side by side, weathering scandals, raising their son Chance, and carving out a quiet life in California. To the public, they were still the golden couple who had turned movie magic into reality. But behind the scenes, cracks had been forming for years. The couple released a carefully worded statement describing their split as amicable. They emphasized their commitment to co-parenting Chance and avoided the kind of bitter headlines that had plagued Hogan's first divorce. But those close to them knew the decision had not come lightly. After more than 2 decades together, their marriage had simply run its course. The passion that had once bound them through scandal and fame had softened into companionship and eventually distance. Linda later admitted in interviews that lifestyle differences had played a major role. She wanted a quieter, more adventurous life away from Hollywood, while Paul remained tied to California, still tethered to the entertainment industry and the legacy of Crocodile Dundee. "I got sick of living in LA and I missed having a real life," she once confessed. For Linda, the glamour had long worn off. She craved something different, something grounded. In 2014, their divorce was finalized. Unlike Hogan's first marriage, there was no public mudslinging, no headlines of betrayal. Instead, it was marked by a bittersweet sadness. They divided assets, arranged custody for Chance, and went their separate ways. For Linda, that meant a fresh start in Morocco, where she pursued a new life running a luxury guest house. For Hogan, it meant staying in Venice Beach, surrounded by memories of the life they had built together. He lived without uttering much about that breakup in public, but in some special moments, he revealed what the break did to him. Again, at the age of 70, he found himself single and brooding over lost love. Friends said that he was going through a lot, though always trying not to let heartbreak define his elder years. Most of his energy went to being a father to Chance, at that time a teenager, while his life tried to keep some semblance of normalcy. But the story was inescapable. For fans and for the media, the love affair between Hogan and Koslowski was always going to be a bigger-than-life thing. The final part of the drama was somewhat like putting the final chapter on a story people had followed since 1986. It was announced by the headlines, bearing the legacy of the end of an era, and many found it heartbreaking. Once upon a time, the couple with an aura of fairy tale magic was living in peace, but it ended quite simply. Even when apart, their life was never entirely divorced. Separateness after the divorce still allowed room for Hogan and Koslowski to stay in touch, as they had a son to take care of. Eyewitnesses in Los Angeles have spotted these two celebs together, and this sparked rumors of a rekindled romance, except that neither has confirmed it. But Hogan admitted that Linda was still one of the most important people in his life. With all the hurt, there was still love, that type that doesn't disappear easily after decades of love. Hogan has bitter but reflective memories of Linda. Interviews revealed how he expressed that she would always be known to him as the love of my life, words that hang over his feelings with warmth and regret. That much Hogan has always said, that fame gave him success, but it was Linda who gave him joy. Nothing ever changed about such things after the divorce. And even after their marriage ended, fate wasn't quite done with them, because years later, Hogan and Koslowski would find their paths crossing once again, sparking whispers of a secret reunion that no one saw coming. Reunion and reflection. For years after their 2014 divorce, it seemed as though Paul Hogan and Linda Koslowski had closed the book on their love story. She built a new life in Morocco, far from the glare of Hollywood, while Hogan remained in Los Angeles, quietly raising their son, Chance. But just when the world thought the story had ended, whispers began to surface. Whispers that suggested Hogan and Koslowski were not as distant as everyone believed. In 2018, paparazzi cameras captured the former couple together in Venice Beach, walking side by side with an ease that spoke of familiarity. They weren't arguing or trying to avoid each other. Instead, they looked comfortable, almost like old friends who had never truly parted. The images fueled a frenzy of speculation. Had Hogan and Koslowski reconciled? Were they quietly rebuilding what had been lost? Neither of them rushed to confirm the rumors. Hogan, by then in his late 70s, had grown far more guarded with the press. He no longer sought headlines. He had lived through decades of them. Linda, too, seemed content to let the world wonder. When asked about her relationship with Hogan, she would smile, dodge the question, or simply say, "We'll always be connected." That connection was undeniable. Their son, Chance, remained a unifying force. And even after moving on with their own lives, both Hogan and Koslowski frequently reunited for family milestones. Friends close to them hinted that the old spark had never really disappeared. "They've been through too much together to ever completely walk away," one confidant told the press. By 2021, Hogan's health began to make headlines. He appeared frail, admitting to the media that age and years of back pain were taking their toll. For fans, it was a sobering reminder that the larger-than-life Crocodile Dundee was human after all. But through it all, Linda never seemed far. Reports emerged that she had quietly reconnected with Hogan, not just as the mother of his child, but as someone who still cared deeply for his well-being. In 2023, the Daily Mail revealed what many had long suspected. Hogan and Koslowski had been spending more time together, rekindling a closeness that had once seemed lost forever. While neither confirmed a full romantic reunion, their actions spoke louder than words. Linda was there, once again, by Hogan's side. And for Hogan, that meant more than any public statement could. On the 85th birthday of Hogan, which falls in the year 2024, he finally broke his silence by giving an interview that left the fans moved and heartbroken. Talking about life, fame, and relationships, he confessed to the one thing that must have erased every lingering doubt. "Linda," he said softly, "was the love of my life. She always was." This was just not mere nostalgia. It was a man, almost at the twilight of his life, saying what he had kept quiet for decades. His words were not about regret, but gratefulness. A man thankful for the time and memories they shared. No doubt, he was married to someone else now and could not have Linda back in his life. There was distance, of course, and there were choices that drove them apart. But Linda to Hogan was always the love of his life. Closure, in a sense, for the fans. For most of them, the life of this man was more like a film, the part of an Aussie icon from drowning in scandalous romance with Koslowski to a Hollywood marriage that appeared perfect as it finally turned to tragedy and their breakup. And yet, the final confession from Hogan brought the whole story into another perspective entirely. This is not the story of yet another celebrity romance gone bad. It is a tale of love that survived even parting by circumstance. To Linda, those words had to mean a lot. Her life was her life, her dreams her own, and she sought independence more than in the shadow of Crocodile Dundee. She, too, had once acknowledged that he was one in a million. Their fire was forged by a romance that defied other standards, geography, and scandal. Maybe perfection was never meant for a Hollywood script. Maybe it was meant to survive only in memory, in connection, and in the heart. At 85, Hogan drew upon no fairy tale endings nor suggestions of a rewind. He merely told the truth. And in so doing, he gave fans one more unforgettable chapter to the story they had been following for almost 4 decades. In the end, Paul Hogan's confession was not only about Linda, it was a confession about life itself. That love, once it finds you, does not really leave you. And for Hogan, with the years passing and headlines fading, there was only one Linda Koslowski. Paul Hogan's confession isn't just a love story. It's a reminder that even legends carry regrets and memories that never fade. If you enjoyed this deep dive into his journey, don't forget to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss more untold Hollywood stories. And before you go, check out the next video that's popping up on your screen right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.